Destroy Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now Tuesday evening here in Budapest, and it is time for the 29th. Who really appreciate it, really appreciate those who are not watching. Said what to football. Anyway, I'm very happy to have joined me. And there are a few things to talk about. I want to get to the issue of Hungary, which things have taken quite a dramatic turn here during the past days. We'll discuss that. I want to start off with the Bastille Day. It's now, of course, July the 14th, a time when France celebrates the that on eternity, red, and lots of other things. But anyway, the Bastille Day coincided with familiar lecturing on the part of France, the UK, Germany, and the rest, pondering about the war against Russia. And so the France was the scene of the latest edition of coalition of, and with the issuance is now almost kind of a issuance of sanctions against Russia. No, not the 21st round of sanctions, which we talked about yet on Monday live stream, and that Bulgaria was balking at the bill and the of Orthodox Church. No, this is sanctions over, yes, Russian cyber activities. It's very strange because I was always under the impression that Russia, this is a permanent, ongoing thing. Russia engaged in some cyber hacking, whatever any of that means. But apparently, hacking now that sanction needed so let's take a look at the tweet that was issued first by Emmanuel Macron today in celebration of, yes, the Bastille Day and the parade, because, of course, Ukraine, as you might have expected, Ukraine showed up for the Bastille Day celebration. And, to my side, French. And so here was Emmanuel Macron saying, proud to see the Ukrainian military marching alongside our forces, a symbol of brotherhood, courage, and shared destiny. This is big words here. Symbol of brotherhood, courage, and shared destiny. Thoughts to the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their freedom, and with it, for that of all Europeans. And now, the moment somebody writes that and says, well, they're fighting Europe and they're fighting for Europeans, and the Ukrainians are marching, along the Champs-Élysées, you wonder that, well, why then aren't you fighting alongside the Ukrainians in Ukraine? I mean, if Ukraine is fighting for your freedom and they're on the front line, and they're here marching alongside you to celebrate Bastille Day. Why aren't you in Ukraine? Why aren't you fighting in Ukraine? And of course, this is why this European posturing becomes so intolerable, because on the one hand, they declare that somehow Ukraine is fighting for us. It's fighting for this the freedom, and we're going to be there with Ukraine to the bitter end. Whatever Ukraine needs, we will provide it. Well, one thing Ukraine would obviously need is you fighting alongside them. And since the stakes are so high, I mean, they're fighting for the freedom of Europe, no less. It's a state, it can't be anything more important than that. But somehow you're not prepared to risk very much. And that's, of course, by this posturing is so insufferable, because, of course, the French are not going to sacrifice French lives. For all the talk, we're side by side with Ukraine, and marching with Ukraine, and they're fighting for us, and they're holding the line against the horrible Russians on our behalf, but we're not actually going to risk anything ourselves. We're not going to go fight. We might get our head blown off. No one wants that. And so that's why you got this ridiculous tweet that he sends out, and then said, "Well, yeah, well, but what are you going to do?" Well, we'll send them some more arms, and we'll send them some more money that they're going to steal, and that's about the size of it. But anyway, that was Macron's tweet, and then Ursula von der Leyen, who was also there, and she was, of course, celebrating this the UK, and with two-tier Keir, who's on his way out the door, but two-tier Keir has signed the UK on to the 90 billion euro Ukraine support loan. So there's no money for anything in the UK, but nonetheless, two-tier Keir, on his way out, in his last days as prime minister, late unlamented. No one seems to be very upset about his departure. On his way out, he managed to burden British taxpayers with this 90 billion euro Ukraine support loan. Anyway, von der Leyen says this will give Ukraine access to a wider range of defense supply, so they can get what they need on the battlefield. Support Ukraine, brave resistance. Notice what here. This will give Ukraine access to a wide range of defense suppliers, so they can get what they need on the battlefield. Now, this is, of course, very belligerent talk from the president of the EU Commission. Very, very belligerent. Remember, she has 7 children. Not a single one of her 7 children has served in the military. And I think, as we've played past, her joking and some of you, not one children in the military. But nonetheless, she's the battle, everything it needs on the. Well, the and arises, as I said, in the case of Macron, is, well, hey, how about sending some European military personnel? Ukraine could. That was one point. The other thing is that the EU, as we've mentioned many, many times before, the EU is supposed to be a peace process, and here, a number of times, Article 3 of the EU treaty, which states explicitly that the EU will pursue peace. That's its goal. The goal of the EU is the promotion of peace, and of course, the EU was awarded the Nobel. In, but there she is. She's talking about the battlefield. So there, that's doesn't sound very. Of course, throughout this war in Ukraine, the EU, in general, von der Leyen in particular, have all been about rejecting negotiations. They've absolutely rejected any possibility of negotiations, and find all sorts of getting to Ukraine possible. All, of course, in the spirit of uh, now. She gives another, and she says, "Today on the Champs Elysees, we celebrate freedom, the cherished heritage of France." I mean, whenever von der Leyen talks about freedom, it's always a kind of a. I mean, you think of a political figure who is less associated with freedom than von der Leyen. I mean, von der Leyen's entire raison d'etre is to take away people's freedoms in every possible way. What a freedom to speak, freedom to think, freedom to be on the internet, freedom to read whatever they want, and of course, freedom to reject, force, all of that. You spend all the time thinking of how can we control people, how can we force them to, because they're stupid for them, whereas I and people like me know what is good for them, and we have a right to impose our will on the stupid, unwashed masses. I mean, she oozes that, as she said, when wondering just the Italian election, which turned out to be dud, what would happen if the Italians vote in somebody who might challenge her, and she said famously, "If he has the tools," and that's her. That's what she's about. He has the tools. The last thing we want is, of course, free. But anyway, she, then says there's freedom. There's no, and then we know it. There's no freedom without defense. She's back on the militaristic. Without defense, no lasting peace without the strength to preserve it. So again, she needs to do some preserving the strength. We need strength. Thanks, commitment for the French army makes the strength of Europe and protects of our entire. And then here's this article that appeared in the New York Times yesterday, in which it gloried in Macron's belligerence. Macron, Trump busy with whatever he's busy with, but so Macron has stepped up to be the leader of this Europe that is ready to go to war, but not just yet. So you're just ready, but yeah, let's do it some other time. Anyway, here is the headline: with blood if necessary. Look at this. This. So we've already had the battlefield from von der Leyen, now we've got blood from Macron. There's a lot of warlike imagery coming from Europe, and it says Emmanuel before more than 5 allies in Paris in a show of support for Ukraine against Russia. President Macron declared on Monday that Europeans were ready to defend their continent with blood if necessary, as he convened these leaders on the day uh, for as the coalition of this is all a lot of hot air. There is no multinational force. There isn't any. But at most, what we're talking about is sending in force after there is some sort of an agreement. But since there is no agreement on the instance, are not really interested in an agreement, is no multinational force. This notion that there is a multinational force to be sent to Ukraine is just completely made up, which they would deploy in the aftermath of a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. Now, this is very interesting because, again, the New York Times is being very slippery here. They say deploy in the aftermath of a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. Now, as we know, and we've talked about this many times already, the ceasefire that the Europeans are demanding, this because essentially Ukraine and its EU sponsors would use the time of the ceasefire in order to replenish Ukraine's forces, rearm, rebuild, redeploy, and to be ready for the next. Obviously, we don't. But in any case, by saying that in the event of a ceasefire, they're going to deploy these multinational forces, then of course Russia is going to reject it. This is the very issue at hand. Is presence of NATO. It's what it's what Russia had is the absolute unconditional, unacceptable condition for there will be a NATO deployment in Ukraine. So if that would be we're going to put in our multinational force, then of course there's not going to be a ceasefire. Why would Russia ever agree to a ceasefire? What happens is immediately this multinational force, this coalition of the willing, immediately send in their forces. So this already is essentially a guarantee that the Russians will not accept anything that the Europeans would supposedly offer. And then say, oh, well, Russia's being unreasonable. Of course, Russia's being unreasonable. Russia is very that you cannot deploy NATO forces in Ukraine. We simply can't have it on our borders. And so here's then that with the multinational force. But what they're trying to do here is to get around the very to essentially confuse issues with the multinational force in the unconditional ceasefire and whatever forces are deployed in the event that there is a peace agreement. Because in the event of a peace agreement, there will have to be some forces to guarantee Ukraine, but also to guarantee Russia. There would have to be some agreement that all sides are protected. The kind of forces guaranteeing Ukraine's security, in other words, a kind of a tripwire whereby NATO enters a behind. But sometimes deliberately uses these two separate issues, which is what happens in the event of an immediate unconditional ceasefire, which Russia obviously isn't going to accept, as opposed to what happens in the event of some kind of a lasting peace agreement. Here's and anyway, then we have the let's continue. And anyways, let's continue. Yeah, sorry, yes. The message we are sending to the world is this: Mr. Macron said, "Yes, peace, we cherish freedom, law, and yes, we are ready to defend them. Always at the cost of blood if necessary." So what exactly is he defending? Yes, peace is our aim. Okay, cherish the law, and yes, we are ready to fight to defend them, always and at the cost of blood. Now, because of course, so somebody, I'm getting some complaints here. I'm getting some complaints about the poor quality of the picture and sound. All right, and then let me try to reboot. Not reboot. Let me see if I can refresh the page. So I might go silent for a couple of seconds, but it does seem like several people are complaining about the poor quality. So let me re. Okay, I'm back. There, is anyway. Is this an improvement? Is this better? Is the sound picture better? Um, like yeah, this is the someone said the Gaggle reboot. Is this picture better? I don't particularly want to reboot. I've just refreshed the page. So is the sound and the picture is that better? Uh, hmm. Well, then I'll continue. Thought it was my so is it the second? You can you now is it clear? The sound, sorry, okay, Cynthia, the sound and picture is fine. Okay, great. So we're okay. Excellent. Um, anyway, pointing out the Macron, by talking law and talking about freedom and so on. Um, um, somebody saying, yeah, now seems to be okay. Somebody saying no, it's not okay. But at least there seems to be a majority in favor of its being okay. So I'm just going to continue. Somebody, the picture broke up again. All right, let's see. Okay. Uh, sound is going in and out again. Still bad on YouTube. Hum 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 hum. Yeah, pum, 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 pum. Let me see. Ginny Mole says YouTube sound and picture quality is choppy. Okay. Well, it's um, YouTube problem. I mean, if it is a YouTube problem, then you can maybe watch it on watch it Rumble or watch it on locals, um, because as a good anymore advisable when whatever, whether it's the quality or whatever, but I think it's advisable. And then some said and the guitar player says, now that I saw the stream on locals. So it's fine, in which case I don't think there's any need for any rebooting, which is cumbersome to do. So anyway, I will continue. I'm sorry about the YouTube issue, and so yeah. And then anyway, Macron said, and remind ourselves of his quote. He says, "The message is yes, peace is our aim. Yes, we cherish freedom and the law, and yes, we are ready to fight to defend them, and always necessary." A particular vacuum to lives for yes, we cherish freedom and the law, and yes, we are ready to fight to defend them at the cost of blood. That's freedom and the law. If you ask people, well, what are you prepared to die for? Well, Frenchmen will say, well, we are prepared to fight for France. This is what we love. We love France, or everything that makes up France. It's where my family have lived for generations. It's where I I what which is we normally think of as patriotism, which is what it is that people care about, what people love, and what they will lay down their lives for. What they won't lay down their lives for is meaningless abstraction, freedom, and the law. I mean almost anything, and no one cares about that. So if it says we cherish it, okay, you can cherish freedom and the law, but these mean France means something. It means something to people. Now, maybe they don't. Maybe they of today doesn't mean much to Frenchmen. We'll have to see. But the notion that somehow you're going to get people to lives of these vacuous abstraction, it really is just nonsense. I mean, Macron to peddle stuff, but he has to do this. Well, obviously because of the Bastille and all these vague generalities that the French Revolution gave rise to, but also since he has to declare, well, what is France today about? Well, French culture civilization, and the French religion certainly isn't about protecting and preserving the French way of life. It isn't about any. It's these sort of abstractions, and is all of that to know. But the conflict between the big and the that he's expecting to give lives for this shows how utterly vacuous Macron is, how utterly incapable he is, and has always been, ever since he became president, utterly incapable of understanding what people. If he's only president really for one reason. One reason only he's president, and that is that he was up twice against and for all these years, Le Pen was a poisonous name. I mean, people remembered her dad, and he was a poisonous name, and then very about the president. He was elected. So it's very similar to Obama to be president of the United States. Well, because people are not going to vote for John McCain in 2008. We're not for uh, um, Mitt Romney in 2012. In the meantime, Macron has hit record unpopular levels precisely because he talks such absolute twaddle about what we cherish these things and we're prepared to cherish freedom and the law, and yes, we are ready to fight to defend them. No, we're not ready to fight to defend France, not France, not the French civilization, not France's contribution to Western civilization, to our shared cultural history. No, 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 none of that. No, we are fighting for freedom and the law. By God, I'm going to lay down my life for freedom and the law. Anyway, he goes on here. The comments reflect a broader effort among European leaders to project strength as the United States is stepping back from its role as the guarantor of European security. I thought the new story is that Trump is on board with the G7 and Ukraine and everything else. I thought we've abandoned the whole thing about the United States is stepping back from its role as the guarantor of European security, which itself is a lot of nonsense because, of course, there've been no real changes other than Trump's occasional outbursts of anger and frustration at the Europeans, but the fundamentals of NATO and all the rest, and about Article 5, what it does and what it doesn't mean, none of that has changed. So this is just a nice piece of um, journalistic claptrap. Oh, United States is stepping back from its role as the guarantor of European security, and so yes, France is going to step into the breach. Yeah, good luck with that. Leaving Europe more vulnerable to threats from a hostile Russia. Vulnerable from threats. Now, this is very, very interesting because, of course, as we all know, and we don't have to go into this at any great length, the who's attacking whom? It's the Europeans who are attacking Russia on Russian territory, and they're killing Russians. Russians are not attacking Europeans. I mean, that's it. So this whole that, and if they've really, really, really felt this threat from Russia, then there's quite a simple remedy, and that is that try finding some form of accommodation with Russia. Try finding some way in which you can work out a modus vivendi with Russia. If you're so afraid, if you're not afraid, then fine. That's it. But since you're, oh well, Europe is vulnerable to Russia. Well, then maybe it's not such a great idea for Europe to get itself in over its head in this war in Ukraine. I say, Marty, I have to look at this because Marty always introduces himself with some great photograph. And this is great photograph is Macron shaking hands, maybe for the last time, with two-tier care. So this was again from today when we had the big meeting in in Paris with the coalition of the willing, and the whole gang was here. And so two-tier care may be a little sad that next year or next time. Remember, the coalition of the willing meets every few months, but during the next coalition of the willing meeting, his place will be taken by Andy. I always say Starmer, but Andy Burnham, and the vacuous figure. But anyway, Macron continued in this way, and then it says in convening the leaders of other countries, Mr. Macron hopes to seize on the new momentum behind Ukraine, which has scored battlefield gains against Russia. Please tell us, what are these battlefield gains? I mean, what they really mean is that they've lobbed a lot of drones onto Russian territory, and they've hit Russian oil refineries, Russian oil storage depots, which have certainly had an impact. There's no question that those attacks have had an impact, and have set Russia back in various ways. That's different from saying they have scored battlefield gains. These are not battlefield gains. They've just inflicted pain and inflicted some setbacks on Russia, but these are not battlefield gains. And one fresh new respect, even from President Trump, and then we have Trump, blah blah blah, and then he goes on to help Ukraine accelerate the development of homegrown air defense industry. France said on Monday that he was joining 8 other European countries, including Britain and Germany, to form a so-called anti-ballistic coalition. So this is the new buzzword, the anti-ballistic coalition. So if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it, that there's now such a thing called the anti-ballistic coalition, which means there's a coalition of powers. This is a subset of the coalition of the willing. There's a new coalition. This is the anti-ballistic coalition. Apparently, they're going to work on some anti-ballistic defenses for Ukraine. So yet another boondoggle, a lot of for the the military, the boondoggle for the military-industrial complex, and so we're now going to have the anti-ballistic coalition. We believe the protection of Europe requires a global solution of integrated missile defense architecture to deter and defeat future missile threats, developed through collective effort, technological openness, and trusted material industrial cooperation. But of course, this, if indeed it happens, this is a long-term project. So, yeah, I mean, okay, you can start developing, start thinking about it, but it's going to take a long time before any of this is going to happen. So, this oil is an anti-ballistic coalition. We're going to have, the industry is going to start developing anti-ballistic missiles. Well, that's a long-term project. It's not going to help Zelensky any, but nonetheless, the coalition of the willing meets, and they all congratulate one another. And then you kind of thought, yeah, and when is that going to happen? But anyway, now this is the new thing. And then anti-ballistic missiles were expected to be a key focus at the meeting, which Mr. Zelensky attended. Of course he did. I mean, he was there at the Bastille. He was there at the Coalition of the Willing meeting. And in addition to the licenses to manufacture Patriots, France and Spain are speeding the development of a new generation of interceptors that will be deployed to Ukraine to stop a barrage of Russian ballistic missiles. Well, I wonder where these interceptors are, because the United States is running short of the interceptors, as we've already found out. Iran can produce ballistic missiles at a faster rate than the United States is able to produce interceptors. So I don't quite know where this new generation of interceptors is going to come from, and how many they're going to produce, and how long it's going to take to produce this. But it sounds good. Anyway, here was the statement issued by the coalition of the willing, which is issued under the Downing Street, two-tier Kears letterhead. And it says, blah, blah, building on the results of the G7 summit in Evian. And then we pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, welcome the recent Ukrainian success. They always get this part of this whole propaganda offensive is just to keep repeating without any evidence, just keep repeating about the recent Ukrainian successes on the battlefield. There are no Ukrainian successes on the battlefield. And then it says, we remain determined to bring about a just and lasting peace for Ukraine, in accordance with the principles of international law, including the UN Charter, that will preserve Ukraine's and our security interest. And then, once again, immediate and complete ceasefire in Ukraine, which you keep saying that, Russia's already turned that down, and resumption of direct negotiations. We support the proposal for a direct dialogue between Ukraine and Russia. And then, which seems to be a little bit confusing, with active US and European participation. Now, that of course becomes very difficult to understand because, of course, both the US recently, but the Europeans, consistently have insisted that they are essentially on Ukraine's side. Europeans made that clear. They've said we cannot be neutral because we are on Ukraine's side. And of course, Marco Rubio said when he was testifying recently in the Senate, we are on Ukraine's side. So if US and Europe participates in these negotiations, they will effectively be on Ukraine's side and therefore, presumably, pushing Ukraine's agenda during the negotiations. It's hard to see why Russia would accept this. I mean, in other words, Russia would be negotiating with Ukraine, and then next to Ukraine would be the United States, and then on the other side there would be the Europe. So it'll be the three of them again. So having said, well, the direct negotiations, but this isn't direct negotiations. This is essentially U.S. and Europe issuing some kind of ultimatums to Russia. But that makes it quite confusing. And certainly, if you want a third party to take part in the negotiations, and then that makes sense, that you have to bring in somebody who is acceptable to both sides and who could act as some kind of a mediator, who could act as I don't know, chairman of the board or whatever. I mean, obviously, China would be one candidate. China has maintained reasonable relations with Ukraine, but probably China would not be acceptable to Ukraine. But of course, China would not be probably acceptable to the Europeans and the Americans because, again, they're with Ukraine, and they will say, well, we don't want China involved in the negotiations. Same with India. They say, hey, well, India is just too biased towards Russia. Now, it's possible. I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but it is possible that Turkey could act as a mediator. I mean, Turkey is a NATO member state, but Erdogan does maintain decent relations with Putin, so I can see that. But the whole idea that there is a bevy of Americans and then a bevy of Europeans taking part in these talks, that's a non-starter. So when you look at this statement from the Coalition of the Willing, you say, what absolute nonsense. I mean, there's nothing new here. You're just coming up with the same claptrap that already they go straight into the waste paper basket. They're not acceptable. And then they state that we support the proposal to bring about a ceasefire starting from the line of contact, again, obviously not acceptable, and support further meaningful negotiations based in particular on the following parameters. No peace without Ukraine. Any peace agreement must be negotiated with the full and continuous participation of Ukraine. So that's a dig at Trump, basically saying no more meetings in Anchorage. No arrangements regarding European interests and security can be negotiated without Europeans. That's a little bit much because I don't see the Europeans have any right whatsoever to any seat at the negotiating table. I mean, all the Europeans have done has been to fuel this war and to reject any possible negotiated settlement. They've just simply been encouraging the war, not coming up with any serious peace plans other than this nonsense that I'm reading out now, which is the same stuff they've been saying since 2022. So the notion that they have some sort of a right to be at the negotiating table is just absurd, and yet they insist on this. And again, I've quoted Viktor Orban before, but Viktor Orban pointed out that you don't just have a right to be at the negotiating table. You kind of have to deserve to be at the negotiating table. And Europeans have done nothing to deserve that. Anyway, elements of any negotiation related to the EU and NATO would need the consent of the EU and its member states and NATO allies, respectively. Says who? Would need? Says who? Anyway, Russian assets will be immobilized until Russia ceases its war of aggression and compensates Ukraine for the damage caused by the war. So, in other words, we're keeping this money because Russia is not going to come up with any compensation for the damage, or at least whatever they negotiate would not be acceptable. I mean, there might be some kind of a package in which Russia invests money in Ukraine proper and in the four oblasts that will be that Russia intends to incorporate within the federation, and then just say, oh well, since in many ways the damage that has taken place, most of the damage in Ukraine has taken place in the four oblasts. So that's where any compensation would go. So something like that could be worked out, but the Europeans aren't going to accept this, and so this money is gone. This is the Europeans intend to keep that money. Anyway, we will continue supporting Ukraine as long as necessary, including with military, financial, and civilian assistance, blah, blah. And then we have the delivery of air defense systems, and this is the anti-ballistic missile coalition talk, recognizing the growing threat posed by the U.S. use of ballistic missiles and increasing importance of the establishment of an anti-ballistic missile coalition, and express our readiness to work at pace to develop so on. And then we commit to ramp up the economic pressure on Russia. There's nothing new here. As long as it continues to attack Ukraine, continue to strengthen our sanctions, and we will continue to take actions to disrupt the Russian shadow fleet in full respect with international law, and in particular with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We will act in a more systematic and coordinated way, including through dedicated mechanisms within the coalition. So this is, in other words, more of these illegal seizures of tankers in the high seas on the pretext either that they're violating EU sanctions, which Russia's under no obligation to observe, since EU law doesn't apply to Russia. Russia's not under EU jurisdiction, so that's a ridiculous premise. So any more than Russian law has any validity in the EU, so it's ridiculous that they're violating EU sanctions. What do they care? Russia doesn't care about EU sanctions. Or they come up with another pretext, which is, well, these containers or tankers don't have the right paperwork, and therefore we're entitled to seize these ships, which of course is a violation of this very UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, where it says you cannot seize uh, uh, tankers in the high seas. I mean, there's just no basis for that, and certainly not because you suspect that that the paperwork isn't correct. That doesn't give you any right whatsoever. Or if the paperwork is not right, then you can report it to the International Maritime Organization, but that's about it. You don't have a right to seize ships in the high seas. But this is their peculiar interpretation of international law, and which we've already seen in the past. Anyway, here we agree that Ukraine's security and stability and ability to defend itself are critically important for ensuring the future of Euro-Atlantic collective security. And then we welcome President Trump's strong statement of support for security guarantees at the NATO summit in Ankara. He never said that. There was nothing in that NATO summit declaration, which was quite terse, about security guarantees. There was the usual mention, oh, well, we will continue to support Ukraine. But what they mean here as security guarantees, a la NATO guarantees, Trump never accepted that, and it wasn't in the Ankara statement. We went through that. We talked about it last week, and we went through that Ankara statement. There is nothing there about security guarantees. But this is always they're lying about these things. And then it says, we reaffirm, as set out in the Paris Declaration of 6th of January 2026, that a long-lasting peace agreement will need to be backed up by politically and legally binding security guarantees. Well, that isn't going to fly. I mean, for the reasons I already pointed out earlier. The moment you start talking about legally binding security guarantees, unilateral security guarantees that apply only to Ukraine. In other words, Ukraine becomes a de facto member of NATO. That isn't going to fly. You can only talk about security guarantees if everybody is guaranteed, which is what people have always understood security guarantee to mean. In other words, both sides enjoy security guarantees. If it's only just one side that gets a security guarantee, then that's a prescription for renewal of the war. I mean, that's the model, of course, was the Locarno Treaty of 1925 between France and Germany, in which Britain and Italy jointly guaranteed France and Germany. Not just, because if you were just simply to guarantee, let's say, France against Germany, then Germany would regard that as essentially a prescription for war. You're essentially, Britain and Italy would be effectively preparing themselves for war against Germany. So the only way you can get a peace agreement done is if both sides, both the protagonists, enjoy security guarantees. But that's not how this coalition of the willing says, oh, well, it's Ukraine that has that's going to get these security guarantees. And then so on, and then enters into force. In addition to bilateral security guarantees and in accordance with our respective legal and constitutional arrangements, those guarantees will be defensive in their nature. Well, you can keep saying defensive till the cows come home. You don't get to decide what's defensive. See, the other side may look at it and say, well, we don't see this as defensive. We see that you are an aggressor. And this has really been the problem. And this is why this is such a pathetic document, that they haven't really learned anything in all this time, that Russia does not regard NATO as a defensive alliance. Russia does not regard security guarantees for Ukraine as defensive in nature. Russia regards that as guarantees that are directed at Russia as preparation for war against Russia. And given all of the hysterical bluster that Western media and then Western policymakers, Western politicians engage in about Russia, you can say, hey, these people are preparing for war. Security guarantees for Ukraine is just simply the preparation for war. And so these guarantees were defensive in nature. The purpose is to prevent a renewal of Russian aggression against Ukraine. That's it. That's the purpose. So it's effectively, it's charging Ukraine up for the next war. The purpose is to prevent a renewal of Russian aggression against Ukraine. In other words, you're going to be building Ukraine up against Russia. Continue with the same policy, using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. And you think that's going to be acceptable? You really think repeating this nonsense is actually going to get you anywhere? Ensure stability and security? No, it's to ensure instability and insecurity in Europe, just as NATO expansion ensured instability and insecurity in Europe. Because NATO expansion was seen rightly as a threat by Russia, and security guarantees directed at Russia will be seen as a threat. Anyway, let's finish this. And then we welcome the multinational force. I have no idea what they're talking about. Multinational force of Ukraine is ready to operate and to act to regenerate Ukrainian forces and to provide reassurance to Ukraine within its territory on the ground, in the air and sea, and so on. And then we got again the establishment of this anti-ballistic missile coalition. Who are the members of this anti-ballistic missile coalition? Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden. You always wonder why a certain country is out of it. Why isn't Finland in this? Finland likes to take part in these. And of course Ukraine and the United Kingdom. and then we have and then we got the UK participating in this wonderful loan. And here you can see that nothing really of any originality in this. But we also yesterday, just on the eve of this coalition of the willing meeting, we had the big announcement of more sanctions against Russia. And here we have, just find this, Kaya Kallas, of course, issuing a statement: "We are sanctioning Russia at speed and scale." Wow, that's isn't that exciting? Today's measures, together with the upcoming 21st sanctions package, will add 250 individuals and entities to the Russia sanctions regime. This is our biggest round of individual designations since Moscow's 2022 full-scale invasion. So this is really very, very exciting. This is the biggest round of individual designations and includes also the EU's largest ever cyber sanctions package. The financial backbone of Russia's war machine is the main target. Every measure weakens Moscow's ability to wage war. And then here the European Council issued the statement: Russian cyber attacks and destabilizing activities. And then here we have the Council sanctions 9 individuals, 4 entities, and of course, the familiar about cyber criminals. But of course, whenever we read these kinds of things, we've read so many of these types of claims by the EU, by the UK. We always have, and this is and here's more of these statements by cyber criminals, and then of course the UK issued its own statement. EU, UK, and EU strike Russian cyber networks with new sanctions, and then again, new sanctions target Russian state's persistent and increasingly reckless attempts to sow chaos and division across Europe. The UK and EU hit back with joint cyber sanctions, UK sanctions, and exposes Russian state and cyber criminal activities, and so on. That. But as I say, the what's always striking about these kinds of claims is that they always arrive without any supporting evidence. So that Russia's doing this and Russia's doing that, and they're hacking this and they're committing cyber criminals and whatnot. We simply have to take your word for it. We don't know whether any of that is true. Oh, they nearly knocked out something or other. Well, this the electricity grid in Poland was nearly taken out, nearly, but it wasn't. And you think, well, it can't possibly be lack of proper maintenance of cyber infrastructure. It can't possibly be just random hackers all over the place. It can't possibly be just simply somebody's made a mess on the work side. No. It has to be Russia engaging in this. But of course, when you're always puzzled as to why Russia would be doing this. What does Russia hope to gain by cyber attacks? What does that mean? I mean, you launch a cyber attack, then it'll be repaired, and then everything's back to normal. Then what? Then you launch another attack, that'll be repaired, and besides, they'll probably harden the cyber infrastructure. Next time it'll be a little harder to attack. It's hard to see what Russia gains from such cyber activity, and or setting fire in shopping malls, or what was it last time we were talking about? Keir Starmer, these Ukrainian boys blowing up a car that Keir Starmer used once and now has sold. So that's why these stories are always so absurd. First of all, we don't see any evidence. And second of all, we don't actually understand why anybody would waste time on this kind of hacking. But we always have to take at face value the claims of these of governments and intelligence agencies, because they tell us, oh, this and this and happened. And so here we have this, then they measure, we're sanctioning GRU senior leadership figures. In addition, the UK, together with the EU member states, is today attributing the attack on Poland's energy grid. So there was an attack on Poland's energy grid to Russia's FSB Center 6. The reckless attack failed. So there really wasn't an attack. It failed, but could have caused 500,000 citizens to lose electricity in the depths of winter. But it can't possibly be because there were maintenance issues in the Poland's energy grid, or that there was somebody cocked up who was working on Poland's energy grid. No. Or it was an ancient grid and whatever. No. It was obviously Russia. It does make life very easy when anything that ever goes wrong can indeed be blamed on Russia. And then see again, as Russia struggles to sustain its ailing war effort in Ukraine, the Russian intelligence service agencies have tasked cyber criminals to collect intelligence to support Russia's military and foreign policy objectives. Please explain how knocking out some electricity grid helps Russia's military and foreign policy objectives. And then Yvette Cooper says these sanctions at the core of the cyber criminal networks propping up the Russian state's aggression in the UK and the US send a clear message, and so on. She continues. And then the more, the UK is also sanctioning individuals behind Luma Stealer, which enables cyber criminals to collect sensitive information from compromised devices to scale. And then there it goes on. And then here's the Politico story. Of course, it's which you would expect. And uh, they have but here's interesting. This is Reuters, which says EU imposes sanctions on Russia with human rights and cybercrime. So this is something. It's not just cybercrime. There's something else that's underlining these new sanctions, which is separate from the 21st round of sanctions. The European Union on Monday broadened sanctions against Russia to include individuals and entities responsible for cybercrime and human rights violations. And then it says naming popular social media app VKontakte, which is the Russian equivalent of Facebook. So that they're targeting this Russian equivalent of Facebook. And here's a VKontakte and its daughter company, Communication Platform LLC, were added to the list for their role in developing and managing Max app for Russian smartphones. So Max app is the social media platform that Russians are increasingly being directed towards. So Russians are kind of being discouraged from. Well, obviously, it's harder and harder for Russians to use WhatsApp, but even they're being directed away from Telegram towards this Max. You may have heard Peter talking about that. So here, VKontakte and its daughter company, Communication Platform, were added to the list for their role in developing and managing the Max app. And then this app is pre-installed on all mobile devices sold in Russia. And then EU countries said Max app was used for repression of critics of Russia's war against Ukraine and of people who posted other content banned by authorities. So if that is the case, then it would make Max very similar to social media in the EU, because just so much as Max is controlled by the government and ensures that the government is able to keep tabs on people's comments, if that's what the EU is claiming, that in other words, the government is able to control who's saying what, and basically and kicks off, and maybe worse, and people, those who make adverse comments about the Russian government. Well, that's pretty much the vision of von der Leyen and of Friedrich Merz and the entire EU, how they envisage social media in Europe. In other words, through this digital ID, so that you won't be able to get on to the social media unless you present ID. And that way, of course, the government authorities will be able to keep tabs on everyone. They'll be able to check up on what everybody's doing. Now, the way it's being done in Europe is because it's all about the pretense of protecting children. The children have to be protected. We have to protect ourselves from child porn. Apparently, this child porn is everywhere. So that's the way it's being done in the EU. So we already have the Digital Services Act. We have the Online Safety Act in the UK, enabling government to keep tabs on people's comments. But now with this the digital ID that's coming now, with the control, the chat control, which the EU has introduced, all of this is now coming under the control of government. So it's a little bit rich for the Europeans. Like, well, Russia is using Max to control the opposition, to essentially use it to keep tabs on what opponents of the government are doing. Yeah, it's on a par of what you're doing in Europe. And let's keep in mind the penalties for adverse comments in Europe are quite strict, particularly in the UK. I mean, the UK arrests more people per capita than any country in the world. Russia does not arrest people for social media posts in the way the UK does. I mean, UK really. I mean, this is like I don't know what the average is, but I think probably about 10 people are arrested a day in the UK for social media posts. So this is really quite rich, that somehow the EU poses as the champion of free speech. We're very worried that the Russian government is cracking down on people's social media posts. Oh, well, that's terrible. But anyway, I did want to say something about what's going on in Hungary. So, as you may have heard, that that yes, that yeah, that this new government has embarked on really uh, quite a drastic series of repression. So we've already talked about the that he's closed down the public television station. So in fact, you really can't watch the news on Hungarian television. So if you want to find out what's going on in Hungary, you can't do it by watching television. What were originally news stations are now broadcasting old movies. So you want to find out what's happening. Well, tough luck. And the Magyar government has now embarked on a quite drastic constitutional change. So, as you know, he has already introduced legislation that would prevent Viktor Orban from coming back to power, simply because he says no prime minister can serve more than 8 years. Completely arbitrary. And so that's eight-year term limit. Since Orban has altogether been prime minister for 20 years, then he cannot come back. But of course, what was striking about this piece of legislation was that it was retroactive, and that's very unusual, because when you pass legislation, that is going forward. We're not going to count anything that you did in the past, because what you did in the past was under the old law, in which when there were no no such restrictions. But this is so now it's retroactive. And now Magyar Péter has proposed a very unusual constitutional amendment to throw out the current president of Hungary, the current president who was elected through constitutional means. He was elected by the National Assembly. That's the way it works. It's not the president is not directly elected by voters. He is elected by the National Assembly. But nonetheless, he'd been elected by due process. But the first thing that Magyar did on winning the election was to demand the resignation of the Hungarian president, Tamás Súlyog. He said he's got to resign. And Súlyog said, well, why should I resign? I was elected. My term in office comes to an end in 2029. Then that's when I'm going to step down. Why should I step down? Because you demanded. A prime minister can't just demand that a president resign. This, of course, enraged Magyar, and then he said, well, we're going to adopt a constitutional amendment to specifically targeting the current president, to remove him from office, not to impeach him because he's failed to fulfill his responsibilities, not to impeach him because he had his hand in the till or whatever. No, just to remove him. Pass a constitutional amendment to remove him for no other reason than I don't like him. Marcos just doesn't like him because he regards him as being a Fidesz man. So leave aside whether he is or isn't. Nonetheless, he was elected to be president by the constitutional process. So the constitutional amendment will remove Thomas Szolyok, and the way that's one part of this the 17th Amendment. Another part is that MPs, elected representatives, will not be able to serve more than 3 terms, another 12 years. 12 years is the maximum. Well, what that will do is, of course, it will mean that more than half of the opposition, which is the members of Fidesz who are currently in parliament, as well as the other opposition party, Mi Hazánk, they won't be able to run because they will have served 12 years. So again, this is retroactive. So in 2030, at the time of the next election, more than half of the opposition MPs will not be able to run. Okay, so that's one more thing, which is very nice. Now, the question then is, all right, this is now passed. Boom! It was, he has a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. Basically, the National Assembly has rubber stamped this amendment, but now it requires the president to sign this amendment into law, and effectively then to sign away his position. So because the law says you're going to be removed. Now, he might do that. We don't yet know. He's got 5 days in which to sign this amendment. If he doesn't sign, then Magyar will claim he deserves to be impeached because he hasn't signed this amendment. It's very, very strange. I mean, presumably he's the president. He can sign or he cannot sign. But the idea that if he doesn't sign, he will be impeached. But that's how Magyar interprets the Constitution. And then the president can, of course, go to the Constitutional Court and say, well, is this constitutional? That I could just be removed from office if I don't sign an amendment that Parliament has voted on. In which case, it's very strange. I mean, if that's the case, he can be impeached because he refuses to sign the amendment adopted by Parliament. Then what is the point of having a president? I mean, if then the president you can just simply absolutely have a rubber stamp. You just simply have somebody there, boom, you go. The whole point of having a separate agency, the presidency, is that he can refuse to sign something that is quite a significant change in Hungarian government that's been rushed through without any proper debate. So if Szolyok doesn't sign, and then Magyar obviously says he's going to impeach him, Szolyok, of course, can go to the Constitutional Court and ask the Constitutional Court's opinion on the matter. Can I be impeached? if I don't sign this amendment. And that is, I think, at least unclear at this stage. I mean, chances are the Constitutional Court will probably just go along with Magyar. But it's significant that as part of this amendment, a number of the members of the Constitutional Court will be removed from office because they will have passed the age of 70. So it's basically there's going to be the 70 will be the cutoff age for members of the Constitutional Court. So the Constitutional Court will be looking at this amendment, knowing that a number of the members of the court will be kicked off the court if this amendment becomes law. So it's not obvious which way the court will go. And then if the court refuses to deem Shuryok's actions as meriting impeachment, they might say, well, he should have signed, but on the other hand, there's no reason for him to be impeached. Then you do have a very interesting constitutional crisis in Hungary, brought on largely by Peter Magyar. And of course, what's interesting, and in fact very striking, is that this is basically a coup that's taking place in Hungary. This is a dictatorship that's going into place in Hungary, all with the approval and the clapping of Brussels. I think this is fantastic. They're really great because he's doing, and I said this really when he won the election, they're going to try and remove all traces of Orbanism from Hungary. And so they said, fantastic, get rid of everyone who had anything to do with Viktor Orban. Anyway, this is the tweet that Magyar sent out yesterday, and gleefully outlining what he was going to do. That this was the plan of how he was going to remove the president, whom he doesn't like, how he's going to remove the judges on the Constitutional Court that he doesn't like, and basically there will only be one source of power in Hungary, namely the Magyar's government. So anyway, it says the parliament is voting today on the 17th Amendment of the fundamental law. This marks an important step in Operation Clean Sweep. Today's decision is a crucial milestone in dismantling the Orban political and economic mafia. So this is the language that he uses, and it's quite striking that it was the Orban mafia that launched his career. I mean, he's a nobody, he's a nothing, he's a zero. He got where he is today because he worked his way through Fidesz, and then married the Judith Varga, who then was a justice minister under Orban. And then she was the rising star, and then she made a mess of the whole issue of pardoning somebody who was involved in covering up a child abuse scandal. It was, didn't really have anything very much to do with anything. But of course, he, Magyar, then secretly recorded his own wife, their own conversation, and then handed over the recording that he made of his wife to the police. That's a measure of the man. So basically, Judith Varga, who helped propel his career, and then of course he records his wife, and then hands the recording over to the police. And so anyway, this is who he is. And then so here then we have the second two. First, it paves the way for the establishment of the National Asset Recovery and Protection Office. So this is going to be a way of impoverishing all sorts of people. They're just basically whatever they call national asset recovery. They're just going to be, just grabbing and the looting and seizing anything they can get their hands on. Second, it puts an end to the possibility of a decades long political monopoly. Third, based on the democratic mandate of the Hungarian people, the replacement of Orban's political puppets can begin. Now, again, you can use this kind of language, and of course, the media, the mainstream media, which act as mouthpieces of the EU, yeah, they just sort of repeat all this. Yeah, yeah, Putin's puppet. Well, the guy was the head of the Constitutional Court. He was elected by the National Assembly to be president. That was in accord with Hungary's constitutional norms. So you can say, oh, there's the Putin, Orban's puppet. I was going to say Putin's puppet. But he can say all of that, but those are political claims. This has nothing to do with the Constitution, constitutional norms. You may not like somebody. You don't like their politics. What has that got to do with a Constitution? And that somehow that there should be orderly transfer of power in government. You don't just push people out because you don't really like them, and then you just sort of make up some law to get rid of the people that you don't like. You would have thought after all the talk of remember the illiberal democracy, Viktor Orban is an illiberal democracy. But no one seems to say, hey, this is pretty illiberal. The whole point of having a constitutional government, constitutional democracy, is that you follow constitutional norms. You follow proper legal procedure. You don't just get rid of, someone in politics you don't like. You just bundle them out of the window. Well, that's it. He's gone. Next. Anyway, then he continues with this Twitter thread. And he says here, the former state party knows this as well. It also knows that under the fundamental law, the president of the republic has 5 days to sign the legislation adopted by parliament today. So this is the threat. His threat, if you don't sign this legislation that essentially kicks you out of office, even though you haven't done anything wrong, you haven't besmirched the office. If he doesn't sign within 5 days, then he is removed. He's going to be just simply removed. He will be impeached. And it says the president may not examine the substance of an amendment to the fundamental law. He may refer it to the Constitutional Court for prior constitutional review only if there is a procedural irregularity that makes the amendment invalid under public law. Well, we'll see about that. That's Magyar's interpretation, that the Constitutional Court can only review procedural matters. They can't review substance. No such irregularity exists. So it's very nice. So no such irregularity. Apparently you just win an election and then you do whatever the hell you like. So that's the idea. Well, that's regular. Sounds regular to me. Though, all the protections that you might have expected. No such irregularity. We won the election, so therefore we get to kick out whomever we want. And then Dr. Tomáš Súlyok knows this too. That is why, until the middle of last week, it appeared that the president would sign the amendment to the fundamental law adopted by Parliament. I didn't get the impression that he had agreed to that. He gave no indication that he was going to do it, thereby signing his own removal from office. And then, however, around Wednesday, Fidesz intervened and instructed the president not to sign the amendment, effectively acting in breach of the Constitution. So, according to the Constitution, as Magyar, this great constitutional lawyer, according to the Constitution, the president is just simply a rubber stamp. He can't do anything. He just simply has to accept whatever the assembly does. One chamber. So Hungary only has a one chamber parliament. Whatever it does, and so long as hey, they've got the 2/3 majority, they can just simply change the Constitution from one day to the next. I mean, they just did it from one day to the next, literally. And he's got 5 days to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, we're going to impeach him. Again, nothing from von der Leyen. What a surprise. And then, so here it says, Fidesz has already prepared the Constitutional Court submission for the president to file, thereby preventing the amendment from entering into force and blocking the dismantling of the Orban mafia, to whom I owe my career. At the Constitutional Court, Viktor Orban's longtime ally, Peter Polt, he's the head of the Constitutional Court, and he also will be removed under this amendment because he will be over the age of 70. So longtime ally Peter Polt is already waiting for the Fidesz drafted presidential submission so that he can effectively bury the case, potentially forever. Well, that's interesting. So now he's arguing against himself. So apparently the Constitutional Court can disagree with the government. So he just says, well, he's doing it because he's for Fidesz. Okay, it doesn't matter whether he's for pro-Fidesz, anti-Fidesz, whatever. That it's supposedly according to a constitutional procedure. So it says, oh, well, he's going to bury it forever. But this becomes very interesting because suppose they do say, no, you cannot remove the president. They could say that. They could say that this, if he doesn't sign this legislation, he cannot be removed for refusing to sign this into law. I mean, that claim that he must be impeached because he refuses to sign into law of a constitutional amendment that hasn't been debated properly, the court could say that doesn't merit impeachment. So here, Magyar seems to be suggesting that might happen, and therefore he seems to be preparing for a crisis. You have to wonder what the next step will be. Will it just simply be arrest and imprisonment? And then anyway, so here, let it be crystal clear to everyone who takes part in this dark and unconstitutional act. This is a dark and unconstitutional, not what we did, that we amended the Constitution without any proper debate. The dark and constitutional act, thereby preventing the will of the Hungarian people from prevailing. What is this will of the Hungarian people? They will be held accountable for their actions if Tamás Súlyog, sacrificing even his remaining integrity, bows to the orders of mafia boss Viktor Orban and fails to sign the amendment to the fundamental law within 5 days of its adoption today, the National Assembly will initiate proceedings to remove him from office. Following that, under the fundamental law, the President of the Republic may no longer exercise his powers, and the Speaker of the National Assembly will be able to sign the legislation in his place. This is his interpretation. This is Magyar's interpretation, that that's how the Constitution works. I'm not sure that the Constitutional Court will agree to it. And then the Fidesz party will be prepared to take every unconstitutional step in the coming days, but I have a message for them. They will not succeed. The ultimate source of power is, after all, the Hungarian people. Again, remember we had all the illiberal democracy. It says, well, apparently this Hungarian people, I won an election, so I can just do whatever the hell I want. And as far as Brussels is concerned, they said, yeah, great, go ahead. As long as you're using your powers to get rid of Orban and Orbanism, yeah, fine, just keep doing it. And so here's a kind of the measure of the Financial Times. This is the FT. How does the FT address these remarkable goings on in Hungary. Hungary's MPs oust president in purge of Orban loyalists. And the subhead is Prime Minister Peter Magyar has called Tamás Súlyog a puppet of the illiberal former leader. So it's the former leader who is illiberal. Orban never did anything remotely similar to what Magyar has done. Nothing. He had never done anything similar. But he's the one who's illiberal. Here's somebody completely ignoring constitutional procedures, just using a majority to ram through major constitutional amendments. I mean, a constitutional amendment is something that should be very, very, very hard to do. In the United States, it is an extremely long, cumbersome, very difficult process. There have only been 25 amendments. That's all. 20. America's republic. There's only been 25 amendments because it's very hard, and there hasn't been an amendment now for many years, many decades is the last amendment. So I know somebody says, let Dasein live. It says, Magyar has ordered that George's years on the Gaggle be counted as 12. Yeah, I think that could be, yes. There'll be kind of a mandatory retirement age for the Gaggle. Anyway, this is the FT, which is always a good bellwether for conventional pablum. Hungary's parliament has voted to oust the country's president in a symbolic move as the new government seeks to remove appointees put in place by former Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So right away, you're supposed to think this is really great. Former appointees of Viktor Orban. He wasn't appointed by Viktor Orban. He was voted in by the parliament. New Prime Minister Peter Magyar has described Tamás Súlyog, a former Constitutional Court Chief Justice, as an Orban puppet who had carried out an agenda of the illiberal leader until he lost the election in April. How could he carry out, what means did he have to carry out? As we've just seen, Magyar seems to think that the president is just simply a rubber stamp. He's just said that. He said that he's just a rubber stamp. He has to do everything that National Assembly tells him to do. He said that. If he doesn't, he gets impeached. So how can Tamás Súlyog carry out Orban's agenda? If that's what he did it because he's a rubber stamp. He had no means of opposing him. That's by his own logic. So the Financial Times just simply repeats this. Oh, well, of course, he was helped to carry this out. And then it continues. Tamás Súlyog chose Viktor Orban instead of the Hungarian nation. That's very cute. How can he choose Viktor Orban when he was elected by the National Assembly? It makes it very difficult. He's supposed to be he's a puppet. He chose Viktor Orban instead of the Hungarian nation. What was he supposed to do? Since apparently Magyar is arguing that a president is simply a rubber stamp. How can he choose the Hungarian nation over the prime minister, the elected prime minister? It's an obviously doesn't make any sense. Magyar said in a speech before the vote on Monday, he called the move a way to honor a clear mandate to unwind the previous system. And then, since taking power with a 2/3 majority in parliament, he has fired the leaders of state television, key state companies, and limited prime ministers to 2 terms. He's gone a little bit beyond firing the leaders of state television. He's closed them down. Financial Times, he's closed them down. There is no news stations in Hungary. That's it. That you can't watch the news on television in Hungary. So he didn't just fire the leaders of state television, which is fine. He closed them down. So there are major constitutional amendments that are taking place in parliament, but you'll be hard put to find out anything about it on television, because where there used to be news, they're now showing old Hungarian films. Hungary's parliament also voted to dismiss former chief prosecutor Peter Polt, um, another Orban loyalist, as chief justice of the Constitutional Court, which is also very interesting because the the Constitutional Court is the one that's going to decide whether what Magyar is doing is indeed constitutional. So that's good. You know, you're firing the Chief Justice. It has set term limits for MPs, preventing most Fidesz core members from running again for Parliament. Magyar has repeatedly called for the president to resign during his election campaign, and in his victory speech said removing Súlyog and other Orban loyalists would be among his first priorities. So here you see what the FD is trying to do here. He's saying, well, he's got an election mandate. Well, even if that is the case, it doesn't matter, because you still have to follow proper procedures. So even if that's true, and that Hungarians voted overwhelmingly to remove all these people from office, you still have to follow proper procedures. The role of president in Hungary is largely a figurehead, but it has some formal veto powers. Súlyog rejected the vote. What vote? He didn't reject the vote. This is notice what the FD has done there. Súlyog rejected the vote. He didn't reject the vote. He swore in the new government. The new government won the election. He swore in the new government. He didn't reject the vote. You see, he's saying, he rejected the vote, as if the vote was to remove him from office, and therefore Magyar was entitled to demand his resignation. He wasn't entitled to demand. You can't just demand. The prime minister can't just demand that a president resign. And so he rejected the vote, and the statements from Magyar. He said, I'm not going to resign. Why should I resign? Saying they manipulated public opinion, he said that interfering with the president's mandate causes exceptional damage to the constitutional order. The president now has 5 days to sign the bill into law. He could refer it to the Constitutional Court for procedural reasons. If Súlyog fails to approve the bill, Magyar said he would impeach the president. And then Súlyog has kept a low profile during his first 2 years as president, and only began to speak up about constitutional protections after Magyar's victory. So first he's supposed to be a puppet. He says, he was a first 2 years as president, he kept a low profile. Began to speak up about constitutional protections. Yeah, because the Constitution wasn't under threat until Magyar came to office. Yeah, the way this is manipulated by the media is just they say, we only began to speak up. It's just what a thoroughly hypocrisy. Well, what was that? Maybe because there were no threats to the Constitution during his term in office before Magyar came to power. And then here again, you got Politico. Hungary's parliament votes to oust Orban appointed president. He wasn't appointed by Orban. But this is the usual journalistic shorthand, which is really just propaganda. And then he says here, the law is part of efforts by the prime minister Magyar's Tisza party to turn the page on over a decade of rule by the now ousted Fidesz party. To which Magyar claims Súlyog and Polt are loyal. So they were both chief judges of the Constitutional Court. Magyar says, they're just part of the Orban apparat. Politico just accepts it without any question. Notice how none of these media ever do any reporting of their own. They just simply repeat it. That's what Peter Magyar says. Well, it must be true. Because we've been told Orban is the bad guy. Orban is obviously illiberal democracy. So he's the bad guy. Magyar says, they're just Orban puppets. Well, that must be true. It's amazing how one really ought to just cut out the middleman and just do away with the media altogether and just simply have public relation handouts. And yeah, yeah. So that's all right. Um, and then we have another example. The New York Times: Hungary's parliament votes to remove Orban loyalists from presidential posts. So these are Orban loyalists. First he's appointed by Orban or he's an Orban loyalist. Um, and here the Times says that some legal scholars and human rights group outside Hungary have raised concerns about the purge. So at least the Times has said, well, I mean, maybe there are issues here that which the FT political certainly didn't accept. And Mr. Orban's supporters have denounced it as a sign of coming dictatorship. But Hungary's new government says the removal of the president, whose term runs out in 2029, was a necessary step. Oh, well, it's a necessary step. Well, thank you. Mr. Magyar has repeatedly called on the president to step down of his own accord, insisting that his party's landslide victory gave him a mandate to remove puppets of Mr. Orban's. Puppet is not a legal term. That's a term of abuse. But you say, I mean, so you know, you can say these things, you can call people names, but it's not a legal term. It's not a term that actually has any legal constitutional meaning. He's just a puppet. For the president's removal to take effect as the constitution must be signed by Mr. Shoyok. Sisi is unlikely to do that. Analysts and diplomats say that Hungary could face a constitutional crisis that risks clouding the new government's prospects for reviving the country's sluggish economy and restoring the rule of law. Restoring the rule of law. This is they're abusing the rule of law. They're making a mockery of the rule of law, and he's restoring. What he's doing is restoring. So, in the name of democracy, we cancel democracy. In the name of the Constitution, we cancel the Constitution. This is perfect EU babble, but it's of a piece with the rest of this fantasy world that we've been led to believe exists now in Europe, over those constitutional governments, there's democracy, and so on. Well, it's a joke. I mean, if you can make just overnight amend the constitution and remove the president just like that, then what kind of a democracy is Hungary? What kind of a constitutional government is Hungary? I mean, like it's same when in Romania, Romania, basically you had an election that was going to be won by the wrong candidate. The election was canceled. There's Russia, 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 but you canceled an election. Then you have these, you have elections in Moldova. Well, we'll just arrest people. Let's just arrest a whole bunch of people and claim that they're all being paid by Russia. Boom, that's it. Same. In the Baltic states. Well, hey, these are people these are Russian bots. Let's arrest them. This whole idea that there's some sort of democracy in the EU, there really isn't. Whenever there's any threat of the wrong result happening, then the apparat goes into action and does one of several things. You can say that, let's say in German, you say the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, is Nazi. Okay, well that's Nazi. Okay, well we have to protect the country from Nazism, so we have to arrest and outlaw a Nazi party. Very easy. Or we can say, oh, they're working for Putin. Well, if they're working for Putin, we're essentially at war with Russia. We can't have Russia running the most important country in Europe, so we have to outlaw the AfD. It's very, very easy. I mean, so democracy is just increasingly a joke uttered by these absolute apparatchiks who could despise democracy, like von der Leyen and the rest. It's like, oh well, it's all in the name of democracy. Anyway, let's then turn to our locals page, and let's address some of the questions and comments of the locals community. You know, the people who very concerned about the dogs, the people who day in day out contribute to the Gaggle. Really appreciate the generosity of the Gagglers, and as I always say, if you want to interact with me, if you want me to answer your questions and comments, please join our locals community. I think because we had somebody on YouTube earlier. I think Ginny Mole said, "Hey, the answer is always join the locals community." So that is the answer. Please join the locals community if you want to talk to me. It's very easy. It is thegaggle.locals.com. Anyway, first question from Danaki, who is one of our most prolific posters. Thank you so much, Danaki. He says, rearm Europe, safe and anti-ballistic this and that coalition. The weapons manufacturers should pay Putin and his ilk a hefty commission. Yes, they should indeed. He has been for the best sales agent since forever, and the greatest pretext boogeyman for Cold War 2.0 and the new arms race. It's like Orwell said, the war is not meant to be won, it's meant to be continuous. Too much to gain for everybody except the buggers dying in the trenches, but who gives an F about them poor sods? Yeah, absolutely beautifully expressed, exactly. No one gives a rat's ass about the people dying. I mean, we started off with quoting this rubbish from Macron and von der Leyen and so on. Yeah, Ukraine is doing this fantastic, great, doing so great. Ukrainians are dying. They're dying by the day. The country is being destroyed. But, Macron doesn't care. Von der Leyen doesn't care. Kaya Kallas doesn't care. It's all in this, yeah, we're fighting against Russia. Yeah, that's wonderful. And you're right, of course, that it's been an amazing boondoggle for the military. I mean, this is great. All the weapons manufacturers, he can just keep this going in perpetuity. Lots and lots of money to be had. You've got all these anti-ballistic missiles that you'll be building, all the interceptors and the radars and everything else. Oh, we'll build that, and then we'll build all the missiles. There's the Storm Shadow missiles and the Tomahawks and everybody, and it's all because of Putin. You gotta have, we need more and more of it. So you're absolutely right. Putin is an absolute godsend, and this isn't coming to an end anytime soon. Whatever happens in this war in Ukraine, first of all, I don't think the war is coming to an end anytime soon. But this preparation for war with Russia, this is going to go on. This is a long-term project, and a lot of money is going to be had there. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And so everything that was said at the Bastille today with this anti-ballistic coalition, and Two-Tier Keir signing on as his last act as PM, signing on to this 90 billion euro loan, pissing away hard-earned money. That's yeah. And that 90 billion, there's going to be another 90 billion coming up, shortly. So this is just a perpetual motion machine, a boondoggle forever and ever. So anyway, thank you so much, Danaki, and then Cynthia. So always very good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia's our film scholar and film expert, and really the one who will provide us with extraordinary detailed and fascinating information about the films that we screen here at the Gaggle. because of her encyclopedic knowledge, because of her extraordinary and prodigious research. We're extraordinarily lucky to be the recipient of so much fascinating and intriguing background information about cinema history, and especially about the films that we screen here. So currently, we are screening one of the really great films, certainly one of the greatest American films ever made, maybe one of the greatest films ever made, which is The Night of the Hunter, made in 1955. Quite remarkable film. Charles Lawton's masterpiece, the only film that he directed. It's a very dark movie, very frightening movie. And so please watch the film, please. And as you watch the film, as I always say, if you watch the film, you have to read Cynthia's comments, because you're going to learn so much more about the film, and through her comments, and you'll get to appreciate the film, the meaning of the film, its place in film history from Cynthia's comments. So thank you so much, Cynthia. Anyway, Cynthia says, apropos of this week's movie theme of police corruption, that's part of this. The poll that we ran, the name Tenderloin came from an 1876 joke by corrupt NYC police captain Clubber Williams, sent to the 29th precinct, a vice hub of brothels and gambling. He knew it was a gold mine for bribes. Williams told a reporter that after years of cheap chuck steak, he would now eat tenderloin. Oh, okay. Papers loved the quip and dubbed it the tenderloin. The slang soon meant any lucrative U.S. vice district where wealthy nightlife met police payoffs. Well, that's interesting. I had no idea about this one. So, I've certainly learned that today. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. I don't know if anyone else knew about this, but anyway, thank you for that, Cynthia. And then Cynthia says, over time, tenderloin shifted from a symbol of wealth to poverty. After World War II, affluent patrons fled to the suburbs, and the legalization of gambling, booze, and prostitution stripped the illicit profits from the neighborhood, shifting these mega revenues to legitimate mega resorts and legal red light districts in states such as Nevada. The sudden loss of high rolling cash caused the district's economy to collapse, leaving its cheap single room housing to decay and leaving its cheap single room housing to decay into concentrated urban poverty. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And then Cynthia, it's really interesting. Thank you, Cynthia. And then Cynthia asks, Trump's 20% toll on the Strait of Hormuz is counterproductive. Well, he's now withdrawn that. Of course, we never really know with Trump when he proposes something and then he kind of withdraws it, whether it's going to come back again. But he proposed yesterday the 20% toll on all ships going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. So blockade of anything going in and out of Iran, that's a blockade. But everybody else, all other ships traversing the Strait of Hormuz would have to pay a 20% toll to the United States. That was the proposal yesterday. Naturally, there was an uproar, particularly among the Gulf states, which were terrified that this was going to be a huge economic and financial burden on them. So they naturally pleaded with Trump to abandon this the 20% toll idea. And Trump's latest suggestion is that in exchange for this 20% toll, the Gulf states, the Gulf kingdoms, will invest in American companies, and that's okay. Everyone loves that. Trump loves that kind of talk. Yeah, invest in American companies. Who the hell knows when and if any of that's going to happen? But sure, you can always pledge investment. You can always promise investment. Until you sign any documents, nothing's going to happen. So the latest, and as I say, the latest because Trump may have changed his mind again since earlier this afternoon. The latest is no 20% toll. It's it's all about investment in American companies. Anyway, Cynthia says this is counterproductive for four reasons. One, it relies on a hypocritical justification, asking payback for military costs. The U.S. actively provoked. Absolutely correct. It was U.S. provoked it. Two, shippers face huge costs from a fee 10 to 20 times higher than Iran's old rate. And instead, it's very amusing. I don't know if you saw, Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, sent out a truth earlier today, in which Arakchi said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right to collect a fee. We've always said that it's perfectly correct to collect fees for the ships going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. However, we intend to charge a fee a lot less than 20%. So yeah, but so Iran, yeah, we will be doing this. United States has now accepted the principle, which was contrary to what the United States position had been. Hey, these are international waterways. You can't collect any fees on ships passing through international waterways. That had been the position up until yesterday. But now Trump accepted that yeah, it's perfectly right to collect fees. We just call it for something else. Oh, well, it's a defense fee. So Iran talked about an environmental administrative fee. Trump talks about a defense fee, but the principle is the same. It's okay to collect a fee on ships passing through international waterways. So the Iran is going to, put it in the bank and say, okay, you've accepted the principle, good. Then there's no point in arguing about the issue if and when we demand a fee for all ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Anyway, then that's shippers face huge costs. Three, it triggers domestic economic fallout, forcing ordinary U.S. consumers to bear financial blow, of course. And four, this aggressive enforcement brings guaranteed escalation, undermining security by turning a vital trade route into a war zone. I mean, all of that is correct. As I say, Trump is now, for the time being anyway, backed away from that fee idea, but nonetheless, he has no idea how to resolve this issue other than to work something out with Iran. Remember, we're not at any state. We're not dealing with any of the important issues that are supposedly going to be negotiated by U.S. and Iranian negotiators. We're not dealing with the nuclear issue. We're not dealing with sanctions. We're not dealing with unfreezing of assets. We're not dealing with the long-term issue of the navigation through the Straits of Hormuz. We're just dealing with what happens during the 60 days of the negotiation process, and when there's no agreement on that because the United States is refusing to accept the principle that Iran must have a say in all ships going in and out of the Persian Gulf. And as long as that happens, then there'll just be this escalation, which you can keep doing it, but that doesn't help Trump any. I mean, it's just because then you're back to the kinetic war without any prospect of the kinetic war reaching any satisfactory conclusion. But that doesn't mean Iran has won. I mean, there's a lot of excitement. Iran's winning and so on. Iran isn't winning anything because this is not a good situation for Iran. But we can see what it is Iran is thinking about, which is it doesn't want the United States essentially to create its own channel to get shipping through the Strait of Hormuz and bypassing the Iranian coastline. I mean, that's obvious. That's what the United States is doing. So that all ships going through the Strait of Hormuz hug the Omani coastline and all bypass Iran. Iran was never going to accept that, and so if the United States insists on this, then there really will be no negotiation. But that's okay, no negotiations, but that still doesn't get us anywhere, because then we can have escalation and kinetic war, but then what? And we've tried that. So we've tried that. We've tried negotiation. Trump isn't really succeeding with any of that very much. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. And then Cynthia says, this blatant geopolitical shakedown sets a dangerous precedent. Yeah. And I'm just waiting for China to mock Trump's pirate tactics using his own words. China is now the guardian of the Taiwan Strait. For fairness, we will plunder a 20% cargo fee to fund security. The hypocrisy is stunning. Weeks ago, Rubio called maritime extortion illegal. Now that Trump has launched his own high seas racket, his only reply to Rubio's legal warning is a literal pirate-like "arr." Yeah. No, I agree entirely. It's a joke. I don't think anyone's going to do it. I don't think China is going to play that game, but Iran certainly will. I mean, Iran has definitely insisted on charging fees, but they're not going to charge 20%, which is insane. So yeah, but yeah, but because Trump has now rescinded this fee idea, he hasn't quite you know put into this decree has not made it now U.S. policy. So U.S. policy is still, in theory, it's maintaining the Rubio policy, which is, hey, you can't charge anyone for passage through international waterways. That is still official U.S. policy. That was just simply Trump being a little bit too loose with his rhetoric. So there's still no official U.S. policy of charging fees. But we'll see. With Trump, we don't know what's going to happen from one hour to the next. And then we have Robert. Always good to see you, Robert. And Robert says, Max Blumenthal has just released a report on Israel's recent destruction of Tehran's Rafi Nia synagogue. He argues it fits a longer pattern, citing the 1950-1951 Baghdad bombings, including the Masuda Shem Tov synagogue attack and the 1954 Lavon affair. More broadly, it is an argument against the state itself. States do not reliably safeguard persons and property, but act largely to preserve and extend their own power. That's of course true, but of course this has really been a sore point, that these supposed terrorist acts that took place in Egypt, allegedly in Egypt, it took place above all in Iraq, and which essentially then led to the departure of the Jews, particularly from Iraq, that this was done by Israel. And that all the stories that this was done by Islamists, that this was done by the government, and that this was the government was trying to remove the Jews from Iraq, all of that was a lie. That it was always Israel that was behind this. And this is, I think, increasingly accepted by Israeli historians. So for years and years, we were led to believe, particularly in the case of Iraq. I mean, we've known about the Lavon affair in Egypt for some years, but in Iraq, we've been led to believe, the Jews were driven out of Iraq, and then this is terrible. These Jewish refugees, they fled for their lives to Israel. We know this was Israel. Israel was behind these bombings, which is quite, really quite shocking and brutal. And the Lavon affair is just explicit. Yeah, these terrorist acts in Egypt were orchestrated by Israel. So anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Really always enjoy your thoughtful contributions. Marty, love the picture of the two amigos, Macron and two-tier here. So two-tier will be gone shortly, but Macron, we're going to have Macron all the way up until May of 2027. So we've got almost a year more of Macron. It just seems like it's forever. He's been a part of our lives forever, and we've still got about a year of him to put up with, and he's getting more and more vacuous and insufferable over the years. So, well, we should celebrate good things. We'll be saying goodbye to two-tier shortly. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty. And Marty also introduces the picture of Trump with Lindsey Graham, Trump giving him a very odd sideways glance. And the Trump has, of course, ordered state flags to be flown at half mast through to Saturday, which certainly seems excessive, to say the least. I mean, Lindsey Graham was just one senator. I don't think he's particularly distinguished, but flags to be flown at half mast for a whole week, that is just completely ridiculous, and inappropriate. But at least he hasn't demanded a state funeral. John McCain got a state funeral. But this, we've already done a couple of podcasts on Lindsey Graham. I don't have much more to add to that. But like his mentor McCain, he has been a bane on America. So he definitely does not deserve state flags to be flown at half mast for a week. Anyway, Summer Petros says, following the disgraceful opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics held in Paris in 2024, yeah, we remember that now, President Macron declared, "This is France." Oh, yeah, you're right. This is France. This included a perverted distortion of the Last Supper. Yes, that's right. This is France. It's very interesting. That he said that this is France, and it's very interesting because, of course, that's not what we normally think of, and I don't think Frenchmen think of that as France. If you think of what is France, they'll say, well, the Notre Dame Cathedral, the many ancient cathedrals litter the French countryside. Yeah, the outstanding food, the beauty of its architecture, the charm of its villages, its wine growing regions. You can just, the list goes on and on. All the things that are France. For Macron to say that is France, that disgusting opening ceremonies. Like today's the French foreign minister, this awful looking guy, Jean-Noël Barrot. He issued some statement very similar to that. I can't remember the exact phraseology. Something like France recognizes no skin color, or something like that. France has no skin color. I think that was it. France has no skin color. Just a ridiculous, pretentious. But this is what the characters around Macron say. So that's why when he said, "What are we going to die for? What was it? We're going to die for." Freedom and the rule of law. That's what we're going to die for. Yeah, good luck with trying to persuade French to die for meaningless abstractions, and particularly for this France, that France of that disgraceful ceremony. Anyway, so thank you so much, Summer Petrus. And Anne Marie, always very good to see you. It was very good to see you yesterday at the screening of Night of the Hunter. Anne Marie is, of course, a musical expert and a musical um, uh, scholar, and of course, our outstanding musical practitioner who's worked with just the amazing conductors and composers and orchestras, and performed just about every a piece of classical music that's ever been composed, including some of the most difficult classical works, some of the contemporary classical music, which are extremely difficult. So Anne Marie has done all that and performed, obviously difficult circumstances, and has written vividly on our pages, the Gaggle pages, about the experience of performing these difficult music in difficult circumstances. So we really appreciate Anne Marie's generosity to the Gaggle, and of course her great generosity with her, really fascinating comments and her fascinating descriptions of working with these outstanding musicians, and in the most difficult of circumstances. So thank you so much for everything, Anne Marie. And NKMRD says, "Good evening. Well, at least the weather was good here." Okay, well, that's something. Enjoy it while it lasts. It's not going to last for long. And then Anne Marie says, "I really enjoyed the film yesterday. It was an outstanding film, extremely beautiful in terms of aesthetics and atmosphere, and and brilliant in his dramaturgy." I absolutely agree. The film has a kind of fairy tale quality to it, but it's also a very dark, terrifying thriller. So an odd combination. But as I say, the fairy tale is sort of a variant on the Hansel and Gretel tale, then a very dark, psychological thriller, and then a kind of a contrast between fake religiosity, which is menacing and threatening, and the contrast between then and genuine religious faith. So there's a lot of the film works at a number of different levels, a very complex film, and it isn't surprising that when the film came out in 1955, neither critics nor audiences were very enthused about it. So it was a commercial flop, but it was also a critical flop. And so no one liked it because they didn't really understand it. It was such an unusual film because the aesthetics was very much, as Cynthia explained. I mean, I can't explain it as well as Cynthia can, but so read her comments alongside the film. But that, Lawton used the sort of techniques from German Expressionism from the 1920s. He used techniques from the silent movie era, and indeed had an actress who was famous in the silent movie era, Lillian Gish. So the aesthetics were very unusual. Essentially, it was almost like a silent film, yet it also had that dark film noir quality of the 1950s, that very gritty, menacing style that the Americans had perfected in that era. So because it combined different genres and different sort of complex themes, I think people didn't like it. People didn't understand it. But gradually, the film acquired, huge reputation, and it is now regarded as one of the greatest American films made, along with Citizen Kane and Vertigo. I'm not sure Vertigo quite deserves to be in that list, but among the three greatest American films, there's Citizen Kane, Vertigo, and Night of the Hunter. So I strongly urge everyone to watch Night of the Hunter. If you haven't seen it, then you've missed out on a lot. If you have seen it, it's always worth taking another look. Anyway, Richard Phillips says, "I'm a deeply cynical person, and I agree we should celebrate two-tier leaving. I don't take joy in small victories. Life isn't worth living." Well, I think taking joy is probably a little strong. I think I think I'm happy that he's gone. I mean, I would say, of course, that Andy Burnham, it's unlikely he's going to be an improvement. I'm quite sure that, once we get used to Andy Burnham's nonsense, and he does talk a lot of nonsense, we're going to find him as annoying and as repulsive as we found Tuti Akir. Nonetheless, I think it's worth celebrating. He's gone. He's not going to be around to bully and threaten and send people to prison and tyrannize over the country as he's been doing for the past 2 years. And he more than anyone else, I think, expresses that contempt for the public, contempt for democracy, so beautifully espoused by von der Leyen and Kaya Kallas. Luckily for von der Leyen and Kaya Kallas, they are appointed, so they can, they don't have to worry about, that the public occasionally gets a look in. But for elected leaders, however arrogant and however much they despise the public, they can't quite cancel elections yet. So they do have to face the voters. And Keir Starmer was so overwhelmingly rejected recently that Labour, in a state of panic, kicked him out and decided to go with someone else. I don't think it's going to make that much difference, but that's the difference between Kaya Kallas and von der Leyen and Keir Starmer. Kallas and von der Leyen, they don't have to worry about voters. Labour does. And as a result, no more to take care. Anyway, my time is up. So thank you, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting question and comments. And as I say at the beginning, I say in the middle and at the end, if you want to talk to me, if you want me to address your comments, please join our community, the Gaggle.locals.com. It's well worth it. We have some really smart, very talented people, as you already even seen from these comments today. And of course, Cynthia's very learned commentary on cinema, Anne Marie's extremely well informed and very personal accounts of music. So all of that is part of the benefits of joining our community, the Gaggle.locals.com. We'll be back Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me. Look forward to it. All the best. Good night.